Welcome to Module 2. Now that you've got the basics of the workflow, let's learn more about the details of scanning and design. The initial key to successful scanning is to be consistent. Go slow initially, keep the wand resting on the teeth, and use isolation or retraction methods to make sure the scan is good quality. Scanner use. Keep the computer power cord plugged in while scanning and designing. Make sure the tip is clean and free of smudges. If the tip gets fogged and will not clear itself, it may be time to order a new tip. These are rated for several hundred hours. Never disconnect the scanner from the computer or the Thunderbolt adapter without first ejecting the correct way. Always rest the wand in a cradle or your hand. Never leave it laying down. Disinfect the scanner tip and the body using Cavi wipes or Sani wipes and a running water and toothbrush to clean the tip. Some tips can be autoclaved. Consistent autoclaving will reduce wand life, so see your paperwork or your representative for instructions on your particular wand tip. Scan the pre-op if possible, intraorally. If scanning intraorally is not an option, take an impression with an Alginate and a triple tray. We do not have to copy that tooth, but we can use it as a guide. This is especially important when we do crowns under partials. The key is to be consistent in scanning and follow a pattern. This pattern is very important. First, scan all occlusals, then roll to one side, scan that whole side, then roll to the other. It is very important we get 100% of the prep and the interproximal contacts. Make sure there is no blue. We have to capture 90% of the adjacent teeth. If you're missing the posterior tooth, make sure to scan 2 teeth in front of the prep. We have to have enough axial material for good design. So make sure you're scanning at a good 90-degree angle if possible on the buccal and lingual. We need to capture at least 2 to 3 millimeters of gingival tissue so that the scans will align properly. The last scan is the bite, which is a zigzag of the correct occlusion. After the pre-op or the clone is scanned, the next scan will be the prep. Always start occlusally. If not, the computer may not correctly align the models. Remember to always scan 3 teeth minimum, always 2 teeth in addition to the crown. The scanning procedure for the prep will be as follows. Start on the occlusal with the wand always pointed towards the distal. Scan the occlusal of the mesial adjacent tooth so that the computer picks up on the data. And keeping the wand on the teeth, move to the occlusal of the prep. Then roll to the right strongly, almost horizontal to the buccal or lingual surface to capture all the data possible. Then roll strongly to the left. If needed, come back to the prep and roll wand back and forth or angle it to capture any missing interproximal data. Go ahead and find a stone model you can practice with and try it out. Take a look at the following video. We're going to show you a couple details about the scanner itself and scanning. We can take the tip off of the scanner, and this is really important when we clean or disinfect the tip. This is the on button. Use that to turn the scanner on and off. There's a green button on the bottom of the tip. Press that to take the tip off. The glass inside and the electrical parts do not touch. Put the tip back on, hear it click, it is in place. Make sure when you hold the scanner it's balanced in your hand. Hold closer to the tip to have better control. Rest the wand directly on the occlusal of the teeth and keep it moving slowly. If you lose your spot, go back to an area you had a good scan. Scan the linguals and then scan the buccals. One continuous motion. When you're done, turn the scanner off and rest it back in the cradle. The bite or buccal scan is the last of the 4 scans that you are going to take, and it's very important that this is accurate. Make sure the patient is biting together all the way and there is no movement. The scanner will not function properly if there is a movement in the tongue or the teeth closing or opening during a bite scan. So we're going to insert the scanner in the patient's cheek. The patient's teeth need to be touching together. We're going to start scanning in a zigzag motion, upper to the lower. I have a little bit of cheek tissue here, so I'm going to come forward, use the scanner to push the tissue out of the way, hover over it for a moment, it'll automatically delete. Go back to a zigzag pattern, scanning towards the mesial, capturing a couple of millimeters of gingival tissue on the way. You need to capture 3 to 4 teeth in this scan. Then we can click Generate Model, make sure that we're happy with it. If we need to delete the scan and start over, we can. Or we can click the icon at the bottom to erase a certain area and hover over a spot and rescan. Design can be very daunting, but it's simplified here into 4 main steps. We must mark the margin clearly. This is the edge of the crown. We must make sure the orientation is correct. The adjacent teeth are parallel and we can see all sides of the prep and the margin. We must make sure the axial walls, marginal ridges, and embrasures are smooth and properly adjusted. Check the occlusion, interproximals, material thickness at the margin, and then do a final evaluation. Make sure the sprue is correctly placed and make sure the sim is good. So we're going to go into a very brief anatomy lesson, some things that might help you understand a little bit better about why we are doing what we are doing in the design process and how it's going to help the patient. So first we want to talk about the curve of Spee. This is something that people notice, especially on a panoramic image or when we're dealing with a denture. But teeth generally follow a curved pattern. Lower teeth curve up in the back like this. And again, this is the distal. This is number 30. Upper teeth will follow that curve. So you'll see the opposite direction of the curve if we were working with an upper model. We want to make sure that the occlusal table of the crown that we're working on is in that occlusal plane. We don't want it too much higher or else it'll hit the upper tooth too heavily. If there is no opposing tooth, we still want to make sure this is within that correct curve. If that patient ever does a partial or a bridge, this crown will still be ideal. The next thing we want to talk about is contacts. So we want broad, good, tight contacts. But why? Well, that's because we want to be able to floss really well in here. We don't want food to trap. We don't want food to trap from the sides or the top. So a broad contact will help keep these teeth in position and keep food out. So for instance, you might get a proposal that has a really narrow contact, maybe something like that. If I remove the adjacent teeth and look at this, it's a pinpoint. Sometimes when we're working on a canine tooth, that might have to be the case, but with a molar, that's unacceptable. We want a nice broad contact, as you can see here. We also want to look at it from the side or slice the plane because the contact might be broad one direction but might not be broad in the other direction. We want it to be good both ways. For instance, proposals a lot of the time start out looking something like this, and this is not ideal. This is a huge area for food to trap. Which brings us into our next point about embrasures. This is the embrasure. This is a very curved area that comes up to a decent contact and strength, but it's way too narrow. This is much more ideal on this side. It's got an even emergence profile from the margin, comes up, contacts, and comes back out. this is a little freeway space to allow food to pass as well. So if we were designing this crown right now, we would take a rubber tooth and just drag that back out. Now it has a really nice even flow, good contour. The marginal ridges are really important. We want them to be pretty close to each other. If this marginal ridge was too much taller, the upper tooth would constantly be hitting this cusp, which could cause the upper tooth to fracture or the crown to fracture. I want to make sure they're even for good occlusion. And again, these are called the marginal ridges. We also want to make sure that the tooth is contoured for gum safety. So lower teeth have a buccal contour that's a little bit more in the central area here. It's going to stick out a little bit more here than it is on an upper tooth. And that is because the upper tooth, the cusps are going to come down here and meet on the outside of this tooth. So when this person is chewing food's going to get deflected this direction away from the gum tissue. If this was too flat, food would go straight down to the gum tissue and this would get a lot of trauma. So this needs to be a little bit thicker here. An upper tooth will not have quite that extreme of a contour in that area. The height of contour on the upper tooth is going to be a little bit higher, closer to the cusp tips. The same thing with the buccal and the lingual. Both need to be contoured enough so that food is deflected away from the gum tissue when the patient is chewing. The lingual should not be very flat either. Lastly, we're going to talk about the occlusal table, which is this area here. We want to make sure that this is nice and broad. This right here is pretty good. We can almost draw a line to connect all the cusp tips. And this premolar is a little bit more narrow anyway, so the line would come in here. You can see these are pretty much in line as well. That gives the upper tooth a really nice broad area to chew on. And again, sometimes you might get a proposal that is a little too narrow. That would be an example of an occlusal plane that's too narrow. If you draw your line here, you see it comes in too sharply. This tooth is a lot more narrow on the occlusal than the tooth behind it. We want to try to match molar to molar and premolar to premolar. And you can use whichever tool you prefer. Rubber tooth tends to work really nicely. We can drag that occlusal table back out to where it needs to be. We want to make sure that when we put on the bite, the opposing tooth, that it has good even occlusion. We want several spots of equal occlusion. An upper tooth is going to look different on the points of occlusion than a lower, but we want to make sure they are even and not too heavy. So this concludes our basic lesson on functionality. There's more videos that you can watch more in depth, so just do your best, and hopefully this helps you understand a little bit more about why we're doing what we're doing. So next we're going to walk through how to design a crown. Open your Romexis icon, add patient, enter your patient information, and again this can be the date, first name, and the last name, or however you want to organize your database. New scan and design. And for this demonstration, I have a stone model that we are going to work with. There is no opposing, there is no bite. We are just going to go over a simple design. Number 30, it is a crown. We have to do a library tooth because there is no clone. Usually will be low translucency. A3 is a very natural, common shade. So we are only going to have a lower scan for this demonstration. We're going to start on the occlusal of the prep, scanning towards the mesial, staying on the occlusal, resting on the teeth, rolling strongly to the right. We're going to capture the linguals, making sure to get good 2 to 3 millimeters of gum tissue, rolling over the top of that distal tooth and rolling strongly to the buccal. It's getting a little bit orange because we're getting far away from the prep. To capture the interproximals, we have to rotate the wand a little bit. You should see that data start to fill in. Green is good data. Red and orange are not the best. So we're missing a little bit of data on the distal lingual. We're going to start the scanner up again. Starting on the occlusal, we're going to rotate a little bit to capture that spot. And we've got some extra data here, so we are going to use our eraser tool and get rid of that. Generate model. Now we have a good model that we have the ability to work with. The high-load data tool will highlight any areas we have not captured, any areas on the margin or in the interproximal that are blue or teal, don't have enough data. Marking the margin and the orientation is the first main step of the design. So we have to make sure we can see all edges of the margin, all walls of the prep, and the adjacent teeth are parallel. It looks good. Deselect orientation. Clicking the tooth will remove the words, mesial, buccal, so forth. Marking the margin, there's different tools. I like to use the trace tool. We're just going to go around and click the margin. If we want to change something, we can go back and alter it later. You can see the edge very clearly. We want to be just in the middle of that green line. And I'm dragging the margin. It's a move margin tool. It works really nicely. If you want to change a big section, you can click Add Segments and click on the yellow spheres. We do not have a clone, so we're going to go straight to design. This is the proposal. The computer generates an idea of what the crown could be like. We need to alter it just a little bit. It doesn't fit. We need to make it bigger and drag it down. It's still a little bit small, so we're going to make it a little bigger. Okay, and then we can hit apply, and the computer will generate something for us to work with. The first thing that I like to do is smooth the tooth all over. And we can use move feature with a library tooth, whereas we cannot do that with a clone. It's your personal preference. Whichever tool works best in your hands makes you most efficient. Try them all out. We want to get all the bumps out so we can see Okay, so we need to make sure that the embrasures are touching. That is the contact between the teeth. And make sure the marginal ridges are even. We don't have any sharp ledges. We want to make sure those profiles are also nice. Don't want any straight lines, no sharp lines. The cusps are sticking out a little too far. We want to make them even with the other teeth. It looks like this tooth belongs there. That's a little better. Little point here, drag in. The key to crown design is we want a smooth and functional crown. We want it to be similar to their old tooth if they had a nice tooth before. We don't want any sharp square edges. But we do want broad contacts. We don't want any floss catching, snagging, no food traps. Next, we have to check the thickness. The light green means it's a little bit too thin. I'm using rubber tooth to drag this up. Looks pretty good. The contacts are a little heavy. It should be a light teal. We have a thickness gauge on the right side of the screen. If you can see the colors, it tells you how much the teeth are touching. The light teal color is the best. And the circle that I'm dragging on the upper right is changing how big of an area my mouse is adjusting. There are so many tools in the system. You can use what works best for you. You just need to try them out and see what you like. Different tools work better for different teeth. The orange around the margin, it's a little bit too thin. We need to add some data. This will be a dropper tool that'll work really well. We don't want any orange or red around the margin. So the last thing that we're going to do here is add some anatomy, make this tooth look a little bit more real. And this is something you don't have to do, but it makes the tooth just look a little nicer. There's no exact way to do this. You can look at the adjacent teeth, or you can look at a model you might already have. It made the crown a little bit thin in those occlusal spots, so I'm going to use the rubber tooth to drag it back up. And I'm measuring the thickness right now with that ruler measuring tool. Okay, so we're going to do a final evaluation. Make sure that everything looks good. And if it checks out, we go straight to mill. So this is the sprue. This is how the crown attaches to the part that holds it into the mill. And this is really important. We can't have the sprue in the contacts or too close to the margin. So right here it's good. It'll fit into a C14 vertical block. We're going to sim this. The computer goes through a simulation process of how the crown will be milled. We've got to slice it in two different places to make sure that these two lines do not touch. We want to make sure this is going to mill out properly. If those two lines touch, then you need to call SOS, the 1-800-537-6070. These areas on the inside of the crown show drag marks where the tool may be having a little bit of an issue. Those are not deep enough to be a problem. We're going to hit send to mill. And it's sent, so we can put the block in the mill and proceed. So this is a demonstration of designing crown number 12, and we do have a pre-op or a clone this time. These models have already been scanned in. We've got the pre-op scan. Can see the margin, can see all the walls of the prep. Here's the pre-op. If it's a good tooth, we can copy that. The lower, we only need the occlusal and the buccal. We do not need any lingual data. And the buccal scan, and again, this is a zigzag scan. This a little bit of data here is a little extra, but that's okay. They aligned properly. You can see the blue is even. The models are not going through each other. And this is aligned properly also. Everything is modeled pretty evenly. Always check those before proceeding. The computer sometimes does not align them properly. The margin has already been marked. This one is not quite as clear, but we can still see it. This is the ice view. We can see a black and white picture of what we scanned. Tracing the clone, we want to select the whole tooth. And I used a trace for that. If you do not select an area correctly, you can move the line. Add segments, click on one dot, click on another dot, and click add segments, and it will change the line. This selection area, if you wanted to remove the prep from the rest of the model, that is what that does. We usually skip the plan tab and go straight to design. The proposal is the green. We want to make sure the red tooth is right inside that green. So what we have here is a proposal. We've got to change it a little bit. As you can see, it's a little bit sharp, it's uneven, interproximals don't touch. The first thing we want to do, like before, smooth the whole tooth. And the tool in the upper right corner of the screen looks like a bubble. We can change the size of the circle and how much material we're taking away with each swipe. Rubber tooth we can use to move the tooth where we want it. We want to make them touch. So I'm just clicking and dragging. We want to make sure the emergence profile is contoured nicely. No sharp edges, no S-curves. We want a smooth, calm emergence profile. Checking the lingual and the buccal. Just keep clicking that to change how you cut the tooth, how you cut the occlusion in the plane. Just making this tooth look a little bit nicer right here. I want it to look similar to the other tooth, have a nice facial profile. We want it to blend in and look like it's supposed to be here. Right here it's a little bit orange at the margin, so we are going to add a little bit of material. It's a little bit thin. Dropper is really good. I'm reducing the amount of material and making the circle a little smaller. I'm going to add a little bit here. It's actually making it slightly more orange. When this happens, this means that the stone or the tooth is very close to the gum tissue. So that means that it's not actually thin, and that confirms it. When I add more material, the orange gets more intense. So we're actually going to take material away by smoothing the tooth a little bit right here. The tooth is plenty thick as it is. And again, that gauge on the right shows you your thickness. So here we're checking the interproximal contacts, and just like before, there's 2 adjacent teeth. We want the contacts to be a light teal color. And the last thing that we're going to do is add a little anatomy. Again, this is not crucial. It just makes the tooth look a little bit more lifelike, and there's no exact way to do it. You want to try to mimic the anatomy that's in a natural tooth. Look at the tooth beside of it, or look at a model you might have. And drag the down arrow, the gingival arrow. Checking the thickness again. When you do anatomy, it does make the occlusion a little bit thinner. Click the bite tool. So click it twice, and this will make it a little bit opaque. We can see the pink is a little bit heavy, so I'm rubber toothing and dragging it down. Those dark smoke colors are perfect. So the profile is good on the buccal. It fits within the clone nicely. The bite's good. Everything is good. Ready to send to the mill. Checking the sprue. We want to make sure it's not in the interproximal contacts. It's not too close to the margin. Click sim. And again, we're checking to see if we need to mill this standard or detailed, and making sure the lines in the inside of the crown do not touch. That's the line of the prep and the interior of the crown. They're not touching. Right here, it's a little bit more space, and you can see on the inside of the crown here, there's a little bit more of a drag area from the tool. But again, that's okay. It's not enough that we need to mill it detailed. So send to mill, standard. Detailed is the setting. We have to change the tool if we need to do that. Usually it's for anterior or small preps. So we sent the crown. Now it's time to go put it in the mill and get rolling. So to sum up, this module was all about scanning and design. At this point, you should be a little bit more familiar with the buttons, the functions of the computer, how to use the scanner, how to navigate through design, and designing a couple crowns. Simple and basic methods, but difficult until you put into practice. So go ahead and try to find a couple models that you can practice with, a couple patients that might be willing to let you practice as well, and give it a try. Come back to the video as many times as you need. Push pause, go back. Practice is the key. Good luck!